I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, staring at empty shelves and bare walls. Everything I'd owned, everything that had defined my life for 22 years, was gone. All that remained was the furniture, stripped of personality and memories. My father's new wife, Vanessa, stood behind me with her arms crossed, not a hint of remorse on her perfectly made-up face. "Where are my things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I cleared out all that junk," she replied with a dismissive wave. "This is my house now, and I needed the space for my home office." My father appeared in the hallway, looking uncomfortable but remaining silent. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the love for his daughter battling against his desire to please his new wife. "Those weren't just things," I said, feeling my hand shake. "That was my life." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Well, you're an adult now. Time to move on." What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was exactly who I'd become in the years since. My father had remarried. The quiet, obedient daughter they remembered was gone. And the woman standing in her place? She wasn't about to let this go. Little did Vanessa realize who she was really dealing with. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up, it was just my dad and me against the world. My mother passed away when I was 8, breast cancer that moved too quickly for treatment to make a difference. Dad became everything to me. Father, mother, best friend, and biggest supporter. He worked extra shifts at the engineering firm to afford our modest home in Pinewood Estates, a middle-class neighborhood in Rochester, New York, and never once complained about the load he carried. I was Madison Taylor, Maddie to everyone who knew me, and I spent my childhood trying to make my dad proud and my mom's memory honored. By 16, I was taking advanced placement classes, volunteering at the local animal shelter, and helping around the house whenever possible. Dad would often say I was growing up too fast, but I could see the pride in his eyes. Then came the company Christmas party 7 years ago. Dad had been reluctant to go. Social gatherings had never been his thing after Mom died, but his boss insisted. That night, he met Vanessa Blackwood, a sleek marketing executive who had recently transferred to the Rochester office from Chicago. She was 15 years younger than my father, impeccably styled and ambitious. "She's just a colleague," Dad had assured me after their third dinner together. But I could see something changing in him. His salt and pepper hair was suddenly neatly trimmed. New shirts appeared in his closet. He started using aftershave again. 6 months later, they were engaged. By the time I graduated high school, they were married, and Vanessa had moved into our home. "You'll love having another woman around the house," Dad said, his arm around my shoulders as we watched Vanessa direct the movers with her endless boxes of designer clothes and modern furniture. I nodded and smiled, not wanting to dampen his newfound happiness, but something cold settled in my stomach. From the beginning, Vanessa made it clear our relationship would be one of convenience rather than family. When Dad wasn't around, her practiced smile would slip, revealing irritation at my presence. She'd rearrange my carefully organized bookshelves without asking, criticize my choice of clothes, and, accidentally, throw away mementos from my mother. "That old photo frame was cracked. Madison," she'd say with feigned innocence. "I was doing you a favor. I kept the peace for Dad's sake." He seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years, and I couldn't bring myself to take that away from him. Besides, I had plans. After high school, I enrolled in the State University's business program, moving into a small apartment near campus. My visits home became less frequent. Holidays, occasional weekends, and each time more of my childhood home had been transformed under Vanessa's influence. Gone were the warm, lived-in couches and mismatched lamps my mother had collected. In their place stood sleek, uncomfortable furniture that seemed designed more for appearances than comfort. My father's beloved workshop in the garage had been converted into a home gym that I never saw him use. Even the kitchen, once filled with the scent of Dad's famous Sunday pancakes, now smelled of expensive candles that gave me headaches. Despite everything, I thrived at university. My business courses came naturally to me, and by junior year, I had landed a coveted internship at Reynolds & Shaw, one of the largest financial consulting firms on the East Coast. I worked harder than anyone else, staying late, taking on extra projects, and impressing the senior partners with my dedication and insight. My supervisor, Gregory Winters, became something of a mentor. A Harvard Business School graduate with 20 years in the industry, he saw potential in me that I hardly recognized in myself. "You have a natural instinct for this business, Maddie," he told me during my performance review. "The kind that can't be taught." When graduation approached, Reynolds & Shaw offered me a full-time position with a salary that made my eyes widen. More importantly, they wanted me to join their special acquisitions team, a small elite group that handled high-profile corporate buyouts and restructuring. It was an opportunity beyond anything I had imagined for myself so early in my career. That night I got the offer, I called Dad immediately, eager to share my success. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he said, genuine pride warming his voice. "Your mother would have been so proud." In the background, I heard Vanessa's crisp voice. "Richard, we're going to be late for the Hendersons' dinner." "Dad, can I come home? This weekend?" I asked impulsively. "I'd love to celebrate together, and I haven't seen you in a while." There was a pause, and I could almost feel him glancing at Vanessa. "Of course," he finally said. "That would be wonderful." When I arrived, that Friday evening the house was empty. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that they had a charity gala and wouldn't be back until late. I should make myself comfortable and not wait up. Sighing, I carried my overnight bag to my old bedroom. At least this room remained mostly untouched. My high school trophies still lined the bookshelf, photos of Mom and me still adorned the walls, and my collection of vintage vinyl records still filled the cabinet beneath the window seat. I sat on my bed, running my hand over the quilt my grandmother had made, feeling both at home and somehow like an intruder. The weekend passed with minimal interaction. Dad and I managed to grab breakfast together on Saturday before Vanessa whisked him away to a golf outing with important contacts. Sunday morning, they were gone before I woke up, a spa day that had apparently been planned for weeks. I left Sunday afternoon, a hollow feeling in my chest. The congratulatory dinner I'd hoped for never materialized. Dad had hugged me goodbye, quickly in the driveway, pressing a check into my hand to help with the new apartment, and promising to call soon. The months after graduation were a whirlwind. My position at Reynolds & Shaw consumed me, with 60-hour work weeks becoming the norm. I rented a small but modern apartment closer to downtown Rochester and gradually filled it with furniture and art that expressed my own taste. My calls home became less frequent, usually brief exchanges with Dad while I could hear Vanessa hovering in the background, urging him to wrap it up. Then came the Westridge Corporation case. A sprawling, family-owned conglomerate with interests in everything from real estate to manufacturing, Westridge was facing internal strife as the founders' children fought for control. The patriarch, Thomas Westridge, had passed away, leaving a complicated will and an even more complicated corporate structure. Reynolds & Shaw was brought in to evaluate the company's assets and propose restructuring options. Gregory assigned me to lead the financial analysis team, a tremendous responsibility that had me working around the clock. For 3 months, I lived and breathed Westridge Corporation, learning every aspect of their business, identifying inefficiencies, and discovering potential that even the family hadn't recognized. "This company has been mismanaged for years," I explained during a presentation to the partners. "Their real estate holdings alone are undervalued by at least 30%, and their manufacturing division is operating at 60% capacity despite having some of the most advanced equipment in the industry. My analysis was meticulous, my recommendations bold but grounded in data. The partners were impressed. When the Westridge family requested a meeting with the team that had produced such insightful analysis, I found myself sitting across from the quarreling heirs in our largest conference room. Elizabeth Westridge, the founder's daughter, leaned forward after my presentation. "You understand our company better than we do," she said, her eyes sharp with interest. "Who exactly are you?" "Madison Taylor, Ms. Westridge, Junior Financial Analyst." Elizabeth exchanged glances with her brother Michael. "Junior? With this level of work? Gregory, you've been hiding talent from us." The meeting ended with an unexpected request. The Westridge siblings wanted me personally involved in the restructuring process moving forward. It was unprecedented for someone at my level, but Gregory backed them up. "Maddie has earned this," he told the other partners. "Let her run with it." The next 6 months were the most challenging and rewarding of my professional life. Working directly with the Westridge family, I reorganized divisions, negotiated with suppliers, and developed a 5-year growth strategy that would increase their overall value by an estimated 40%. When the project concluded successfully, Elizabeth Westridge invited me to dinner at the Pinnacle, Rochester's most exclusive restaurant. "To celebrate our new direction," she said, raising her glass of champagne, "and to discuss your future." I nearly choked on my drink when she named the figure, a compensation package that would multiply my current salary several times over, along with an executive position in their newly streamlined corporate structure. "We need someone with your vision," Elizabeth said. "Someone who can see potential where others see only numbers." "I'm flattered," I replied honestly. "But I've only been with Reynolds and Shaw for a year. I owe them. Loyalty is admirable." Michael Westridge interjected, "But don't let it hold you back. We're offering you a seat at the table, Ms. Taylor. Real influence and the resources to match." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I promised to consider their offer, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I called Dad to share the news, hoping for guidance or simply congratulations. The call went to voicemail. I left a brief message asking him to call back when he had a chance. 3 days later, he still hadn't returned my call. Concerned, I tried again, only to have Vanessa answer. "Richard is very busy with a project at work," she said, her tone making it clear she considered my call an intrusion. "I'll tell him you called." "Vanessa, please, it's important. I have a major career decision to make, and I'd really like his input." She sighed audibly. "Madison, you're 22 years old. Don't you think it's time you stopped running to Daddy with every little decision? He has his own life to worry about." The words stung, but there was a kernel of truth in them that I couldn't deny. My father did have his own life now, one that increasingly seemed to have little room for me. After another sleepless night weighing my options, I accepted the Westridge offer. Reynolds and Shaw was disappointed to lose me, but understood the opportunity. Was too good to pass up. Gregory took me to lunch on my last day. "You're going to do remarkable things, Maddie," he said as we parted. "Just remember what I taught you. In business, information is power. Know more than anyone else in the room, and you'll never be caught off guard." The transition to Westridge came with more than just professional changes. My new position required frequent travel, meetings with investors, and attendance at industry events. I invested in a wardrobe befitting an executive, learned to navigate corporate politics, and gradually developed the confidence to stand firm in rooms filled with people twice my age and experience. 6 months into my new role, Elizabeth Westridge approached me after a particularly successful negotiation with a stubborn supplier. "You remind me of my father," she said thoughtfully. "He could see the chess moves before anyone else realized they were playing chess." Coming from her, it was the highest compliment. Thomas Westridge had built an empire from nothing, transforming a single hardware store into a multi-billion-dollar corporation through sheer will and strategic brilliance. I wish I could have met him, I replied. He would have liked you, Elizabeth said with certainty. In fact, he would have tried to adopt you professionally. She paused, studying me. Madison, how would you feel about taking on some of our special projects? Things that require discretion and a particular kind of insight. Those special projects turned out to be corporate acquisitions of struggling companies, businesses, with solid foundations but poor management, hidden assets, or untapped potential. My role was to identify targets, evaluate their true worth, often disguised by accounting practices or market misconceptions, and develop strategies to acquire them at favorable terms. It was delicate, high-stakes work that required absolute confidentiality. Each successful acquisition increased Westridge's portfolio and my own reputation within the company. By the end of my first year, I had my own office on the executive floor, a team reporting directly to me, and a compensation package that made my initial salary seem like pocket change. Through it all, my relationship with Dad grew more distant. Our conversations became perfunctory updates about work and health, rarely touching on anything meaningful. I sent gifts for birthdays and Christmas, occasionally suggesting visits that were inevitably postponed due to conflicts on either side. When we did manage to connect in person, Vanessa was always there, monitoring our interactions and steering conversations away from anything that excluded her. I told myself it was a natural evolution. I was building my own life, and so was he. If there was an ache that came with this new reality, I pushed it aside, focusing instead on my rapidly advancing career. Then came the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early October. I had just returned to my apartment, after a 3-day business trip to Chicago when my phone rang with Dad's number. "Maddie," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped instantly. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" No, nothing like that," he assured me quickly. "It's about the house." "What about it?" There was a long pause, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "We're selling it. Vanessa's found a place in Scottsdale, a gated community with a golf course and all the amenities. She thinks the warm weather would be better for my joints." I sat down heavily on my couch, suddenly dizzy. "You're moving to Arizona? When?" "The closing is next month. We've already accepted an offer." "Next month?" My voice rose in disbelief. "And you're just telling me now?" He sighed. "I know. I should have mentioned it sooner. Things have been moving quickly, and Vanessa thought it would be better to wait until everything was certain before bothering you. You're so busy with your work." The excuses washed over me as I struggled to process what this meant. The house, where I'd grown up, where every corner held memories of my mother, where Dad and I had created our own little world after her death. It would belong to strangers. "What about Mom's garden?" I asked, thinking of the rose bushes she had planted, which Dad had faithfully tended for 14 years. "What about her things in the attic?" "We've been downsizing," he said carefully. "Vanessa hired a professional organizer to help us decide what to keep." Translation: Vanessa had been throwing away my mother's legacy piece by piece, and Dad had allowed it. "Dad, there are things of mine still in that house, things that matter to me." "Of course, sweetheart. You should come this weekend and collect whatever you want to keep. After that, we'll have the estate sale company handle the rest." This weekend. As if I could just drop everything and rush over to salvage what remained of my childhood. As if the memories contained in that house could be sorted and packed in a matter of hours. "I have a business trip to Boston this weekend," I said numbly. "The earliest I could come would be next Thursday." "That should work," Dad replied, relief evident in his voice. "I'll let Vanessa know." After hanging up, I sat in the dark of my apartment, my mind racing. The logical part of me understood that selling the house made practical sense. It was too large for 2 people, especially with retirement approaching. The emotional part, however, reeled at the thought of strangers living in those rooms, oblivious to the history they contained. I rearranged my schedule, postponing meetings and delegating tasks to ensure I could take Thursday and Friday off the following week. The Boston trip couldn't be avoided. We were finalizing the acquisition of a manufacturing company that had been in the works for months, but I would fly directly to Rochester afterward. The intervening days passed in a blur of work and worry. I found myself distracted during meetings, my thoughts drifting to what awaited me at the house. How much had already been discarded? What would remain of the home I remembered? When I finally pulled into the driveway on Thursday afternoon, exhausted, from back-to-back flights and running on minimal sleep, the house looked deceptively unchanged from the outside. The maple tree still stood sentinel by the curb. Its leaves turned brilliant orange in the October sunlight. Dad's old Ford was parked in its usual spot, joined now by Vanessa's sleek white Lexus SUV. I sat in my rental car for a long moment, gathering my courage. Then, with my overnight bag slung over my shoulder, I walked up the familiar path to the front door and rang the bell. A strange formality that my father would have found amusing in earlier days, but that now felt necessary. Vanessa answered, her smile professional but not reaching her eyes. Madison, right on time. Come in. She was dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a day at home. Tailored black pants, a crisp white blouse, and heels that clicked sharply on the hardwood floors I remembered helping my father install when I was 12. Your father's. On a conference call, she explained, leading me into the living room I barely recognized. Work emergency. He should be done soon. I nodded, setting my bag down and taking in the transformed space. The comfortable sectional where Dad and I had watched countless movies was gone, replaced by a sleek gray sofa that looked more decorative than functional. The walls, once covered with family photos, now displayed abstract art in coordinating colors. I can show you to your room, Vanessa offered, so you can get started. My room, as if it were still mine in any meaningful way. I followed her up the familiar staircase, noticing that even the family photos that had once lined the wall had been replaced with professional black and white landscapes. At the door to my childhood bedroom, Vanessa stepped aside with a gesture that seemed almost triumphant. And that's when I saw it, the empty room that had once held my life. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the barren room that had once been my sanctuary. The walls had been painted a sterile off-white, erasing the soft blue I'd chosen with Mom when I was 10. My bookshelf stood empty, the collection of novels and textbooks I'd accumulated over years, gone. The corkboard where I'd pinned concert, tickets, photos, and achievement certificates, stripped bare. Even the vintage record player that had been a gift from my grandfather was missing. Where are my things? The question came out barely above a whisper. Vanessa brushed an invisible piece of lint from her sleeve. Oh, I cleared all that out last week. This space is going to be my home office. I've already ordered a desk and filing cabinet that will arrive tomorrow. You cleared it out? I repeated, struggling to comprehend. What did you do with my belongings? Most of it was donated, she replied with a dismissive wave. It was just taking up space, Madison. Old school books, childish knickknacks. You're an adult now with your own place. You don't need that clutter anymore. That clutter was my life, I said, my voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. Those were my memories, my mother's things. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. Richard agreed it was time to let go of the past. We're starting fresh in Arizona, and that means clearing out old baggage. Maddie? My father appeared in the hallway behind Vanessa, his expression shifting from confusion to dismay as he registered my distress. What's going on? My things are gone, Dad, I said, turning to him. Everything. Vanessa donated it all without asking me. He glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. I thought we agreed you'd set aside the important items, he said to Vanessa. She placed a hand on his arm. I saved the photo albums and a few keepsakes, she assured him before turning back to me. They're in a box in the garage. Everything else was just stuff. Replaceable. Not to me, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm building inside. Those replaceable items included the last birthday card Mom wrote me before she died, the quilt Grandma made by hand, the collection of vinyl records I spent years hunting down. Dad's face paled. Vanessa, you said Madison didn't want those old records anymore. I never said that, I interrupted, keeping my eyes fixed on Vanessa's face. I never said I wanted anything thrown away. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes turned cold. Well, there must have been a misunderstanding. Regardless, what's done is done. The important thing is that we're making progress on preparing for the move. Progress? I echoed incredulously. Is that what you call erasing every trace of me? From this house? Madison? Dad stepped forward, his tone placating. I'm sure Vanessa didn't mean— Oh, I think she meant exactly this, I cut in, still not looking away from my stepmother's face. This isn't the first time, is it, Vanessa? First, it was Mom's things disappearing bit by bit. Now it's mine. Anything that reminds Dad of his life before you gets conveniently cleared out? That's enough. Vanessa's voice was sharp. I've done nothing but try to help your father move forward. This house was a mausoleum when I moved in. Every corner, a shrine to the past. It wasn't healthy. Not healthy for whom? Dad? Or your ego? Madison, Dad exclaimed, shocked at my directness. I finally turned to him, feeling something break inside at the confusion in his eyes. Dad, can't you see what's happening? She's systematically erased Mom from this house for years, and now she's doing the same to me. Your father and I are building a new life, Vanessa interjected smoothly. One that isn't chained to painful memories. You should be happy for him instead of throwing a tantrum over some old possessions. These aren't just possessions. My composure cracked. They're pieces of my history, our history, I added, looking at Dad. Mom's garden that you tended for 14 years? Gone. Her cookbooks? Gone. And now, apparently, all evidence that I ever lived here too. Dad reached for me, his face stricken. Maddie, please, this is my house now, Vanessa stated flatly, dropping the pretense of politeness. And I won't apologize for making changes that should have been made years ago. You're an adult with your own life. It's time you stopped expecting your father to preserve your childhood bedroom like a museum exhibit. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because of the small grain of truth buried within them. I was an adult. I did have my own life separate from this house, but that didn't give her the right to dispose of my belongings without permission. Something shifted inside me at that moment. The hurt and shock receded, replaced by a cold clarity that felt almost foreign. I straightened my shoulders and regarded Vanessa with new eyes, not as my father's wife or my unwanted stepmother, but as an adversary in a different kind of negotiation. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. I am an adult with my own life, a life that's quite different from what you might imagine. Vanessa's expression turned wary at my sudden change in demeanor. Dad, I'd like to see what's in that box in the garage, I said, turning away from her. After that, I'll find a hotel for the night. Don't be ridiculous, Dad protested. You'll stay here. This is still your home. I smiled sadly. No, it's not. Vanessa made that perfectly clear. In the garage, I found a single cardboard box labeled Madison in Vanessa's precise handwriting. Inside were a few photo albums, my high school diploma, and a small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to my mother. Nothing else remained of the extensive collection of memories and mementos I'd accumulated over 22 years. I'm so sorry, Maddie, Dad said quietly, standing awkwardly behind me as I knelt beside the paltry remains of my childhood. I thought there was more. I should have checked. I closed the box and stood up, suddenly exhausted. It doesn't matter. Now. Of course it matters, he insisted. I'll talk to Vanessa. Maybe we can track down where the donations went. Dad, I interrupted gently. It's done. Like Vanessa said, what's done is done. He looked so lost in that moment, older than his 57 years, caught between his wife and his daughter, with no way to please both. I felt a flash of guilt for adding to his burden, quickly followed by anger that Vanessa had put us in this position. I have an early meeting tomorrow, I lied. I should get to the hotel and rest. At least stay for dinner, he pleaded. We hardly see each other anymore. The thought of sitting across the table from Vanessa, making polite conversation after what had just transpired, was unbearable. Another time, I promised, knowing it was unlikely to happen before they moved across the country. I carried the box to my rental car, Dad trailing behind with concerns about my driving when I was upset and offered to call me tomorrow. As I pulled out of the driveway, I watched him standing there in the gathering dusk, looking lost on his own property. For the first time, I wondered if he was truly happy with the life Vanessa had constructed for them, or if he had simply surrendered to its momentum. The Parkview Hotel downtown offered me a refuge for the night, an anonymous space where I could process what had happened and decide on my next steps. Sitting on the king-sized bed, I methodically went through the box, cataloging what remained and what was lost. The photo albums were intact, at least, preserving images of happier times. The jewelry box contained my mother's wedding ring, which Dad had given me on my 18th birthday, along with her pearl earrings and a few other precious pieces. But the losses were staggering. The quilt my grandmother had hand-stitched for my birth, my collection of first edition novels, the journals I'd kept throughout high school and college, letters from my mother, written during a summer camp stay when I was 7, which I'd treasured after her death. All gone, discarded as clutter by a woman who had never bothered to understand their value. I was about to close the box when something caught my eye, a folded document tucked into the back cover of one of the photo albums. Pulling it out, I recognized the letterhead of Preston and Webb, the law firm that had handled my mother's estate. It was a copy of her will, which I'd never actually read. Dad had handled everything after her death, shielding me from legal matters. As much as possible, curious, I began to read through the formal language. Most of it was straightforward, personal items left to Dad and me, instructions for her funeral. Then a paragraph near the end made me sit up straight. The property at 1487 Oakwood Drive, Rochester, being my separate inheritance from my parents, I leave to my daughter, Madison Claire Taylor, to take possession upon her 25th birthday or upon her father's remarriage, whichever comes first. Until such time, her father, Richard Taylor, shall have full right of residence. I read the paragraph 3 times, not quite believing the words before me. The house Vanessa was so eagerly selling, had never fully belonged to my father. It had been my mother's inheritance, and according to her will, it should have been transferred to me years ago when Dad married Vanessa. Either Dad had never read this provision in the will, or he had deliberately kept it from me. Neither option seemed in character for the honest, straightforward man who had raised me. Unless Vanessa had somehow intercepted this information. I checked the date on the document. It had been executed 2 months before Mom's death, when she knew her prognosis was terminal. The signature of the notary public was clearly visible, as were the signatures of 2 witnesses. This wasn't a draft or a copy. This was a legal document that should have been filed with the probate court. My mind raced with implications. If the will was valid and had been properly filed, the house legally belonged to me, not to Dad, and certainly not to Vanessa. They couldn't sell it without my consent. But if that were true, why hadn't the lawyer contacted me after Dad's remarriage? Why hadn't Dad mentioned it? Pulling out my laptop, I searched for Preston and Webb Law Firm. They still existed, with offices in downtown Rochester. It was too late to call tonight, but first thing tomorrow, I would contact them for clarification. Sleep eluded me as questions churned in my mind. Around 3 in the morning, I opened my work email out of habit and saw a message from Elizabeth Westridge with the subject line, Pinewood Properties Acquisition. I clicked it open, momentarily grateful for the distraction from my personal turmoil. Madison, Elizabeth had written. The research team found something interesting about that Rochester development we discussed. The original land parcels were part of a contested estate back in the 1990s. Might create complications for our purchase. Can you look into the Preston probate case when you're back? Documents attached. The Preston probate case. My mother's maiden name was Preston. With growing suspicion, I downloaded and opened the attached files. What I found made my blood run cold. The documents detailed a significant inheritance that had come to my mother from her grandparents, not just our house, but several adjacent land parcels that had since been developed into the entire Pinewood Estates neighborhood. According to these records, the family had owned over 50 acres of prime real estate, most of which had been sold off by my grandfather before his death. But not all of it. The house on Oakwood Drive was just a small part of what remained. There were 3 additional undeveloped parcels listed in the estate documents, parcels that would now be worth millions given the area's growth over the past 2 decades. And according to my mother's will, it all should have come to me 7 years ago when Dad married Vanessa. I sat back, stunned by the discovery. This wasn't just about my childhood mementos anymore. This was about a significant inheritance that had somehow been kept from me. But by whom? And why? A new email notification popped up on my screen. Another message from Elizabeth, sent just minutes ago despite the late hour. Forgot to mention, the developer buying those parcels is Blackwood Ventures. Might be worth looking into their ownership structure before we proceed. Blackwood, Vanessa's maiden name. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. With renewed purpose, I opened a new browser window and began searching for information on Blackwood Ventures. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a real estate development company founded 5 years ago, specializing in upscale residential communities in the Northeast. The company had completed several successful projects in Pennsylvania and New York, with a new development planned in Rochester, Pinewood Heights, an exclusive community of luxury homes on the last undeveloped land in the Pinewood Estates area. The CEO and majority shareholder was listed as Vanessa Blackwood Taylor. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa hadn't married my father for love. She'd married him for access to my mother's property. Somehow, she had discovered the value of those undeveloped parcels and had orchestrated an elaborate plan to get her hands on them. But there was still one piece missing. How had she managed to circumvent my mother's will? The document I'd found was clearly authentic, with proper signatures and notarization. It should have been legally binding. I continued searching through public records until I found what I was looking for, a different version of my mother's will filed with the probate court dated 1 week later than the one I'd discovered. In this version, the house and remaining property were left to my father outright, with no mention of a transfer to me upon his remarriage. 2 different wills, both apparently legal, with significantly different provisions regarding the property. One of them had to be fraudulent. As dawn broke over Rochester, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about reclaiming my childhood possessions anymore. This was about exposing Vanessa's deception and protecting my mother's legacy. I showered and dressed with careful deliberation, selecting a charcoal gray suit that I typically reserved for high-stakes negotiations. Today would certainly qualify. After ordering room service breakfast that I barely touched, I called Preston and Webb Law Firm the moment their office opened at 8:30. "This is Madison Taylor," I told the receptionist. "I need to speak with whoever handled my mother Claire Preston Taylor's estate in 2009. After a brief hold, I was connected to Harold Webb himself, the senior partner whose name was on the door. "Ms. Taylor," he greeted me warmly. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What can I do for you?" "I recently discovered some discrepancies regarding my mother's will," I explained. "Specifically, provisions related to the property at 1487 Oakwood Drive." There was a pause on the line. "That's concerning," Webb said finally. "Your mother's estate was handled by my former partner, James Preston. Your uncle, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes," I confirmed. "My mother's brother, but he passed away about 5 years ago." "Indeed. A great loss to our firm. However, I should still have access to the records. Could you come to the office this morning? This isn't a conversation I'd prefer to have over the phone." 2 hours later, I sat across from Harold Webb as he carefully examined both versions of my mother's will. His office was exactly what one would expect from a senior attorney: wood-paneled walls, leather-bound law books, and an atmosphere of quiet competence. "This is most irregular," he said at last, setting down the documents. "The will filed with... The court is indeed dated later than the one you found, which would normally suggest it was your mother's final testament. However, I prompted when he hesitated. Webb removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Your mother was already in hospice care by the date of this later will. According to my records, she was on significant pain medication and wasn't seeing anyone except immediate family. Are you saying she couldn't have legally executed a new will at that point?" "I'm saying it would be highly unusual," he replied carefully. "Especially without our firm being involved. Your uncle, James, was very protective of his sister's interests. I find it hard to believe he would have allowed a major change to her will without significant documentation of her wishes and verification of her competence." I leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, I believe my stepmother, Vanessa Blackwood Taylor, may have been involved in submitting a fraudulent will. She's currently in the process of selling the house, which according to my mother's original will should have been transferred to me 7 years ago when she married my father." Webb's expression darkened. "That's a very serious allegation, Ms. Taylor." "I'm aware," I replied calmly. "I also believe she's attempting to develop the remaining Preston land parcels through her company, Blackwood Ventures." His eyebrows shot up at this. "I see. Well, if what you're suggesting is true, we have a significant legal situation on our hands. First, we need to establish which will is authentic. After that, we can address the property transfer and any improprieties that may have occurred." "How long will that take?" I asked. "The house is already under contract to be sold next month." Webb reached for his phone. "With sufficient cause, we can file for an immediate injunction to halt any sale or development, pending investigation." He looked at me intently. "Are you prepared for what this might mean for your relationship with your father? These proceedings can become contentious." I thought of Dad standing in the driveway, looking lost as I drove away. Of the years of growing distance between us orchestrated by Vanessa. Of the home and memories she had systematically erased. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." As I left Webb's office with a plan in motion to halt the sale and investigate the conflicting wills, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years I had tiptoed around Vanessa's control of my father and our family home, prioritizing his happiness over everything else. Those days were over. Vanessa thought she had won by clearing out my belongings and claiming the house as her own. She had no idea who she was really dealing with, or what I was capable of. That afternoon, I returned to the Parkview Hotel to find 3 missed calls from Dad on my cell phone. I wasn't ready to speak with him yet, not until I had all the facts straight and a clear plan of action. Instead, I called Elizabeth Westridge. "Madison," she answered on the second ring. "I didn't expect to hear from you during your time off." "Something's come up with those property parcels you mentioned," I said, getting straight to the point. "It seems I may have a personal connection to the situation." Personal? Her voice sharpened with interest. The Preston family you referenced in the documents, Claire. Preston was my mother. According to her original will, I should be the legal owner of those undeveloped parcels, not Blackwood Ventures. There was a moment of silence on the line. Well, Elizabeth finally said, this certainly complicates matters. How can I help? I explained the situation succinctly. The conflicting wills, Vanessa's company, and my suspicion of fraud. Elizabeth listened without interruption, and I could almost see her analytical mind working through the implications. This goes beyond our usual acquisition strategies, she acknowledged when I finished. But I'm intrigued, both professionally and personally. If what you're suggesting is true, then this Vanessa person has orchestrated quite the scheme. I believe so, I replied, and I intend to expose it. You'll need resources, Elizabeth said decisively. Legal support, forensic accounting, perhaps even private investigation. Fortunately, Westridge Corporation has all of these at our disposal. You're offering Westridge's help? I asked, surprised despite our good working relationship. Let's call it an investment in our most valuable executive, she answered smoothly. Besides, I've never liked seeing unethical operators succeed in our industry. It sets a bad precedent. She paused. There's also the matter of those parcels themselves. If they rightfully belong to you, and if you were inclined to sell or develop them legitimately, Westridge would be very interested in discussing options. Of course, I thought. Elizabeth always had an angle. Still, her support would be invaluable. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. For now, I'm focused on stopping the sale of the house and investigating the will situation. After that, we can discuss future plans for the property. Fair enough. I'll have our legal team contact Harold Webb immediately. And Madison? Yes? Tread carefully with your father. Family situations like this can get messy quickly. After hanging up, I checked my email to find that Harold Webb had already sent preliminary paperwork for an emergency injunction against the sale of the house. I reviewed and signed the documents electronically, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. At least the immediate threat of losing the house was being addressed. My phone rang again. Dad for the 4th time. With a deep breath, I answered. Maddie, where are you? His voice was strained with worry. I've been calling all day. I'm still at the hotel, Dad. I had some business to take care of. You need to come home, he insisted. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. Vanessa feels terrible about the misunderstanding. I closed my eyes, counting silently to 5 before responding. I doubt that very much. Madison. Dad. There's something I need to tell you, but not over the phone. Can you meet me for dinner? Just you, I added firmly. Not Vanessa. There was a pause, and I could almost feel his internal struggle. All right, he finally agreed. Where and when? We settled on Salvatore's, a small Italian restaurant we had frequented as a family before Mom's death. It was neutral territory. Neither the house that was now the center of our conflict, nor my hotel room where Dad might feel ambushed. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner booth and ordering a glass of Cabernet to steady my nerves. When Dad walked in, I was struck by how tired he looked. The lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered, his posture slightly stooped. He spotted me and managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You look nice, he said as he slid into the booth across from me. Very professional. I was still wearing my charcoal suit from the meeting with Webb, a deliberate choice. I wanted Dad to see me as the competent businesswoman I had become, not just his daughter. Thanks for coming, I said, skipping the small talk. I've learned some things today that we need to discuss. The waiter approached, and Dad ordered a whiskey on the rocks. Sounds serious, he commented after the waiter departed. It is. I pulled out the copy of Mom's original will and slid it across the table. Have you seen this before? He glanced down at the document, his expression puzzled. Your mother's will? Of course. We went through all this after she passed. Look at the provision regarding the house, Dad. He furrowed his brow but obliged, scanning the document. When he reached the relevant paragraph, his face paled visibly. He read it again, then looked up at me in confusion. This can't be right, he said finally. The will I signed, it left the house to me outright. You signed a different will, I confirmed, dated 1 week after this one. But according to what I've learned, Mom was heavily medicated during that time and unlikely to have made such a significant change to her estate plans. Dad shook his head, still struggling to process the information. I don't understand. James handled everything. He showed me the will, I signed the necessary paperwork, and that was that. I was trying to focus on you, on getting us through those first terrible months without her. Did you actually read the will that was filed with the court? He looked away, and I had my answer. James said it was straightforward. The house and remaining assets came to me, with provisions for your education and future inheritance. I trusted him. He was Claire's brother. But James didn't file this will, I said gently. Someone filed a different version. A version that conveniently removed the clause transferring ownership to me upon your remarriage. Dad's whiskey arrived, and he took a long swallow before responding. You're saying someone tampered with Claire's will? That's a serious accusation, Maddie. I believe Vanessa may have been involved, I said, deciding to lay all my cards on the table. Did you know she owns a real estate development company called Blackwood Ventures? His surprise seemed genuine. She has a real estate business, yes. She started it a few years after we married. But it's small. A few renovation projects, some rental properties. It's more than that, I countered. Blackwood Ventures is currently developing a luxury residential community called Pinewood Heights on land that was originally part of Mom's family property. Land that, according to her actual will, should have transferred to me along with the house. Dad's face cycled through several emotions: disbelief, confusion, dawning realization. That's why she was so insistent on selling the house, he murmured, almost to himself. She said it would fund our retirement, but she's been pushing harder than made sense, especially since I mentioned wanting to postpone the move until after the holidays. The development plans are already in motion, I explained. The sale of our house is probably the final piece she needs to control the entire parcel. But how would she even know about Claire's family land? I barely understood all the details myself. I hesitated, then shared my theory. I think she may have targeted you specifically, Dad. Found out about Mom's inheritance and the valuable undeveloped land, then positioned herself to gain access to it through marriage. The hurt that flashed across his face made me regret my bluntness, but he needed to know the truth. Are you saying she never loved me? That our entire marriage has been some sort of long con? His voice cracked on the last words. I reached across the table and took his hand. I don't know what she feels, Dad. I just know what the evidence suggests about her actions. She knew about Mom's property, manipulated her way into our lives, and has been systematically working to gain control of assets that legally should be mine. Dad withdrew his hand and took another sip of whiskey. This is a lot to process, Maddie. I know. And there's more. I explained about the injunction. I'd filed to stop the house sale and the investigation that Webb was initiating into the conflicting wills. You did this without talking to me first? A flash of anger crossed his face. I had to move quickly to stop the sale, I explained. And honestly, Dad, I wasn't sure how you'd react. Vanessa has had a strong influence over your decisions for years. He flinched at that, but didn't deny it. What happens now? Webb will proceed with challenging the fraudulent will. Meanwhile, I need you to act normally around Vanessa. Don't confront her or let her know we're investigating. The more evidence we can gather while she thinks she's in the clear, the stronger our case will be. Dad looked troubled. You're asking me to deceive my wife. I'm asking you to help expose someone who appears to have deceived you for 7 years, I countered gently. Someone who threw away Mom's things, erased her from our home, and is now trying to profit from her inheritance. His expression hardened at the reminder. When you put it that way. He drained his whiskey and set the glass down firmly. What do you need me to do? We spent the next hour formulating a plan. Dad would return home and continue preparations for the move as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, he would look for any documents related to Blackwood Ventures or the property development that Vanessa might have at the house. He would also casually mention a delay in the closing process to gauge her reaction. Be careful, I warned, as we prepared to leave. Vanessa has proven she's clever and calculating. Don't take unnecessary risks. Dad surprised me with a hug before we parted. I'm sorry, Maddie, he whispered. I've been blind to so many things. We'll fix this, I promised, holding him tightly. Together. Back at the hotel, I found emails from both Elizabeth and Harold Webb. Elizabeth had assigned a team from Westridge's legal department to assist with the case. While Webb reported that the injunction had been granted, the house sale was temporarily halted pending further investigation. I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction before turning to my next task, learning everything I could about Vanessa Blackwood Taylor. A deep background check revealed interesting details. Vanessa had grown up in a middle-class family in Chicago, earned a marketing degree from Northwestern, and worked for several high-profile companies before moving to Rochester 7 years ago. On paper, her career progression looked normal, even impressive. But there were gaps that raised questions. She had changed jobs frequently, never staying with one company longer than 2 years. Her transfer to Rochester had come after an abrupt departure from a Chicago firm under circumstances that weren't clear from public records. And before Chicago, she had spent time in Boston, where she had been briefly engaged to a wealthy real estate developer nearly 30 years her senior, who died unexpectedly just months before their wedding. Following the money, I murmured to myself, remembering Gregory's advice from my early days at Reynolds and Shaw. Vanessa had a pattern, pursuing relationships with older, financially secure men, positioning herself to benefit from their assets. Phone chimed with a text from Dad. V upset about delay in closing. Calling real estate agents nonstop. Said timeline critical for next project. I smiled grimly. The pressure was getting to her. Good. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor at my hotel. The front desk called to inform me that Mrs. Taylor was asking to see me, Vanessa. I considered refusing, then decided it might be useful to hear what she had to say. Send her up, I instructed. She arrived at my door looking perfectly put together as always. Designer blouse, tailored pants, not a hair out of place. Her smile was tight as I invited her into my room. This is cozy, she remarked, glancing around. The standard hotel suite with barely disguised disdain. It serves its purpose, I replied neutrally. What can I do for you, Vanessa? She sat on the edge of the armchair, maintaining perfect posture. I wanted to clear the air after our disagreement. Your father is very upset. Is he? I took a seat across from her. He seemed fine when we had dinner last night. A flash of annoyance crossed her face. You had dinner with Richard? He didn't mention that. We had a lot to catch up on, I said vaguely. 7 years creates quite a gap. She crossed her legs, visibly recalibrating her approach. Madison, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I genuinely thought I was helping by clearing out those old things. Your father agreed it was time to declutter before the move. Did he specifically agree to dispose of my mother's records? My grandmother's quilt? My childhood journals? Her smile tightened further. Details get lost in the process of downsizing. Perhaps I should have been more careful about certain sentimental items. Perhaps, I echoed, waiting for her to reveal the real reason for her visit. She sighed dramatically. The fact is, What's done is done. We need to move forward. Your father tells me you're upset about the house sale. And there it was. I have many fond memories of that house, I said carefully. It was my childhood home. But surely you understand that it makes no sense for your father and me to maintain such a large property when we're relocating to Arizona. The market is excellent right now. The timing couldn't be better for selling. For whom? I asked innocently. Dad mentioned you've been quite anxious about meeting specific deadlines. A flicker of something, wariness perhaps, crossed her features before she smoothed them into a sympathetic expression. Your father has been under financial pressure since his company downsized last year. He hasn't wanted to worry you with the details, but the truth is, we need the proceeds from this sale to secure our retirement. This was news to me. Dad's company downsized? He never mentioned any financial concerns. He wouldn't, Vanessa said, with a small shake of her head. He's too proud. But trust me, this move is necessary for his financial security. Any delay in the closing could jeopardize our plans. I studied her carefully. Either she was lying about Dad's financial situation, or he had kept significant problems from me. Either way, she was applying pressure to ensure the sale proceeded as planned. I understand, I said, injecting just enough doubt into my voice to seem like I might be wavering. It's just hard to let go of the past sometimes. Relief flashed, briefly in her eyes. Exactly. Change is difficult, but sometimes necessary. I'm so glad you understand. She stood, apparently satisfied that she had accomplished her mission. I should get back. Your father has a doctor's appointment this afternoon. Is he ill? I asked sharply. Just routine tests, she assured me. Nothing to worry about. Will you be coming by the house again before you leave town? I'm not sure. Yet. My work schedule is quite demanding, she nodded, already moving toward the door. Of course. Your career is very important. She paused, hand on the doorknob. By the way, what exactly do you do now? Richard mentions you work in finance, but he's a bit vague on the details. The question was posed casually, but I sensed a purpose behind it. I'm in corporate acquisitions and restructuring, I answered truthfully, but vaguely. Evaluating companies, identifying untapped potential. How fascinating, she murmured, though her eyes had grown wary. We should discuss it sometime. I have a small business myself, real estate development. So I've heard. Blackwood Ventures, isn't it? Her smile froze. That's right. How did you know? I shrugged. Dad mentioned it once. Sounds interesting. It's a modest operation, she said, downplaying it just as Dad had. Nothing as sophisticated as what you must deal with. You never know, I replied with a smile. Sometimes the most significant opportunities come from unexpected places. After she left, I immediately called Dad. Vanessa just visited me, I told him when he answered. She mentioned your company is downsized and you're having financial problems. Is that true? What? No, he replied, sounding genuinely confused. The company's doing fine. I got a bonus last quarter. That's what I thought, I said grimly. She's lying to pressure me about the house sale. She also mentioned, you have a doctor's appointment today? No appointments, Dad confirmed. I'm at work. She said she was going shopping. Another lie. The question was, where was Vanessa really going, and why did she need to create false alibis? Dad, can you check if any Blackwood Ventures documents are missing? Files, folders, anything. Related to business or property development? I'll look when I get home, he promised. But Vanessa keeps most of that in her home office, which she keeps locked when she's out. The locked office was a red flag in itself. Don't try to get in there, I cautioned. Just note anything obvious that might be missing. After hanging up, I called Elizabeth. I need surveillance on Vanessa Blackwood Taylor, I explained. She just left my hotel and is supposedly going shopping, but I suspect she's doing damage control on her development project. Already arranged, Elizabeth replied, efficiently. After our conversation yesterday, I had one of our security consultants begin monitoring her movements. I'll have him report any significant activities. Thank you, I said, genuinely impressed by Elizabeth's proactive approach. That's not all, she continued. Our research team found something interesting about James Preston's death 5 years ago. It was ruled a heart attack, but there were some unusual circumstances. He was in good health, had just had a clean physical the week before, and there was a significant withdrawal from his bank account the day he died, $50,000 in cash with no clear purpose documented. A chill ran down my spine. You think Vanessa was involved? I think it's worth looking into, Elizabeth said carefully. Particularly given the timing. His death occurred just as Blackwood Ventures was being incorporated. If he knew about the fraudulent will... She didn't need to finish the thought. If my uncle had discovered that someone had tampered with my mother's will, he would have taken immediate action to correct it. His sudden death had eliminated that possibility. We need to move carefully, I said, my mind racing with implications. If Vanessa is desperate enough to commit fraud for this property, there's no telling what else she might do. Agreed. I've taken the liberty of arranging additional security for you and your father. Discreet, but effective. I thanked her again, acknowledging to myself how fortunate I was to have Westridge's resources behind me. Vanessa might think she was dealing with a sentimental daughter upset about losing some childhood trinkets, but she had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. The game had changed. I was no longer just trying to recover my rightful inheritance. I was potentially uncovering a pattern of criminal behavior that might include my uncle's death. The stakes couldn't be higher. As I began compiling a timeline of events from my mother's death to the present, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated, my resolve hardened. Vanessa had systematically dismantled my family's legacy piece by piece, thinking no one would notice or fight back. She had severely underestimated her opponent. By evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier on Vanessa Blackwood Taylor. Beyond the suspicious pattern of relationships with wealthy men, I discovered she had studied pre-law for a year before switching to marketing, giving her enough legal knowledge to understand wills and probate procedures. She also had a brief internship at a document services company that specialized in legal paperwork processing, a place where she could have learned techniques for document manipulation. Most tellingly, I found a connection between Vanessa and the notary public, whose signature appeared on the fraudulent will. Jennifer Lassiter had worked at the same marketing firm as Vanessa in Chicago. They had been colleagues for nearly 2 years, more than enough time to build the kind of relationship where one might ask for an inappropriate favor. I was making notes on this connection when my phone rang with an unknown number. Madison Taylor speaking, I answered professionally. Ms. Taylor, this is Detective Robert Callahan, Rochester Police Department. The voice was deep, authoritative. I'm calling regarding Harold Webb. My stomach dropped. What about him? There's been an incident at his office. Mr. Webb asked us to contact you directly. What kind of incident? I asked, already reaching for my jacket. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Are you able to come to the Preston and Webb offices downtown? 20 minutes later, I arrived at the law firm to find police cars parked outside the normally stately building. An officer directed me to the 3rd floor, where I found Detective Callahan, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and shrewd eyes, standing outside Webb's office. Ms. Taylor, he greeted me with a firm handshake. Thank you for coming so quickly. What happened? I demanded. Is Mr. Webb all right? He's shaken but unharmed, Callahan assured me, leading me toward a conference room. His office was broken. Into late this afternoon. The intruder was apparently searching for specific files. In the conference room, I found Webb sitting with a uniformed officer, giving a statement. He looked up when I entered, relief washing over his tired face. Madison, he said, standing to greet me. I'm glad you're here. Someone broke into your office? I confirmed, glancing around as if expecting to see the culprit lurking in a corner. Webb nodded grimly. I had stepped out to meet with a client. When I returned, I found my assistant tied to her chair and my office in disarray. The safe was untouched, but my files— He gestured helplessly. They took everything related to your mother's estate. My blood ran cold. Everything? Will I find the original? That and all my notes on our investigation, plus the documentation. I was gathering for the injunction hearing. Detective Callahan was watching me closely. Mr. Webb tells me this may be connected to a case of possible will fraud and real estate development. I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to the police at this stage. Webb made the decision for me. Detective Callahan is an old friend, he assured me. We can trust him with the details. Over the next half hour, I explained the situation. My mother's conflicting wills, Vanessa's real estate company, the valuable property at stake, and our suspicions about her involvement. Callahan took meticulous notes. This is primarily a civil matter, he said when I finished, but the break-in and assault on Mr. Webb's assistant elevated it to a criminal investigation. If your stepmother is involved, she's escalating in a dangerous way. My father, I said, suddenly, feeling panic rise. If she knows we're investigating, he could be in danger. I've already dispatched officers to your family home, Callahan assured me. They'll ensure your father's safety without alerting your stepmother to our concerns. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth's security consultant. Subject visited. Bank. Withdrew large sum. Now at an office building in the business district. Meeting with an unknown male. I showed the message to Callahan. She's making moves, I explained, possibly preparing to flee or cover her tracks. The detective frowned. We don't have enough evidence yet for an arrest, but I can have officers observe her activities. That won't be necessary, I replied. Westridge Corporation has resources, already monitoring her. I'll ensure you receive all the information they gather. Webb looked impressed at this revelation. You've been busy, he commented. A uniformed officer appeared at the door. Detective, we found something. He handed Callahan an evidence bag containing what appeared to be a woman's earring. Found near the file cabinet, the officer explained. Doesn't belong to Mr. Webb's assistant. I leaned forward, examining the jewelry through the plastic. A small pearl earring with a distinctive gold setting. That's Vanessa's, I said with certainty. She was wearing those yesterday when she came to the house. Callahan's expression hardened. Physical evidence placing her at the scene changes. Things. I'll need a formal statement from you identifying this item. After signing the necessary paperwork, I consulted with Webb about our next steps. The loss of the original documents was a setback, but not insurmountable. I sent digital copies of everything to my home server, Webb assured me. An old habit from years of practice. We can still proceed with the injunction hearing, though we'll need to explain the circumstances of the break-in. My phone rang. Dad's number. Excuse me, I said to Webb and Callahan, stepping aside to take the call. Dad? Are you okay? I'm fine, he replied, his voice low and tense. But something's happening. Vanessa came home agitated, started packing suitcases. She says there's a family emergency in Chicago, but she's been making frantic calls all evening. Is she still there? I asked, signaling to Callahan. In her office with the door locked. I can hear her arguing with someone on the phone. Dad? Listen carefully, I said, keeping my voice steady. The police are sending officers to the house. There's been a development. Vanessa may have broken into Webb's law office and stolen documents related to Mom's will. His sharp intake of breath was audible. You think she's running? It looks that way. Don't confront her, but don't let her leave if possible. The police will be there soon. I understand, he said grimly. I've been such a fool, Maddie. Now's not the time for that, I told him firmly. Just stay safe. I'm on my way. I relayed the conversation to Callahan, who immediately got on his radio to coordinate with the officers heading to the house. We'll need a warrant, he muttered, already dialing on his cell phone. Judge Harrington owes me a favor. Leaving Webb to recover what he could of our case documentation, I rode with Callahan to my childhood home. The normally quiet suburban street was now lined with unmarked police cars, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Your father said she's still inside? Callahan confirmed as we approached the house. As of 15 minutes ago, I replied, scanning the property for any sign of disturbance. Dad met us at the door, his face pale but composed. She's gone, he said without preamble. Must have slipped out the back while I was watching the front. Her car is still here, though. Callahan immediately dispatched officers to search the surrounding area, while others began processing the home office Vanessa had left in disarray. Papers were scattered across the desk, the computer was still on, and a half-packed suitcase lay open on the floor. She left in a hurry, Callahan observed, carefully examining the room without touching anything. Probably got spooked when your father started asking questions. Dad looked devastated. I tried to keep her talking and asked about this Chicago emergency. She got suspicious when I pressed for details. I put my arm around his shoulders. You did your best. The important thing is, you're safe. One of the officers approached with a laptop. Found this hidden under the mattress in the master bedroom. It's password protected. Callahan nodded. We'll get our tech team on it. In the meantime, let's see what else she left behind. The search revealed several interesting items. A prepaid cell phone with calls to numbers in the Cayman Islands, a folder of incorporation documents for shell companies, and most damning, a notebook containing what appeared to be practice signatures, including a reasonable facsimile of my mother's handwriting. I don't even know what to say, Dad murmured as we watched the evidence being cataloged and bagged. How could I not have seen any of this? She was careful, I said gently. She compartmentalized her life and only showed you what she wanted you to see. Callahan approached with a grim expression. We've got a bolo out for her, but with her head start and unknown transportation, it won't be easy. Has she mentioned any friends, other properties, places she might go to ground? Dad shook his head helplessly. She kept her friendships separate from our marriage. I've met colleagues from her real estate business at company events, but no one close. What about other family members? I suggested. She must have mentioned relatives at some point. A flash of realization crossed Dad's face. She has a cousin in Buffalo, Nicole something. They weren't close, but Vanessa mentioned staying with her when she first moved to the area. Callahan immediately relayed this information to his team. It's a start. We'll check flights, car rentals, bus schedules, anywhere she might have gone. My phone buzzed with another update from Elizabeth's security consultant. Subject observed entering parking garage at Westview Apartments on Oak Street. Approximately 45 minutes ago. Met with male subject driving black Audi sedan. License plate NYE 8472. Both departed in an Audi heading east on I-90. I showed the message to Callahan, who immediately radioed in the information. That's the direction of Buffalo, he noted. Your Westridge people are proving quite useful, Ms. Taylor. They're thorough, I agreed. Elizabeth Westridge doesn't like loose ends. As the investigation continued through the night, I persuaded Dad to pack a bag and check into my hotel. The house is a crime scene now, I explained. Besides, we could both use some distance from this place right now. He didn't argue, moving through the home with a shell-shocked expression, gathering essentials while avoiding looking too closely at the life he had built with Vanessa. In the car, he was silent for several minutes before speaking. 7 years, he said finally, his voice hollow. 7 years of my life with a complete stranger. Someone who apparently married me for property and was willing to steal from my daughter. It's not your fault, I said firmly. Vanessa is obviously skilled at deception. She's done this before. He turned to me, surprised. Before? I hesitated, then decided he needed to know the full picture. She was engaged to another wealthy man before you. He died suddenly just before their wedding, and there's evidence suggesting she may have been involved in Uncle James's death as well. Dad's face was drained of color. My God, you think she killed James? We don't know for certain, I admitted. But the timing is suspicious. He died just as she was incorporating Blackwood Ventures, which would have been around the time he might have discovered the fraudulent will. This is unimaginable, Dad whispered. I brought this woman into our lives, into your mother's home. You couldn't have known, I insisted. She targeted you specifically, Dad. This wasn't random bad luck. At the hotel, I got Dad settled in, a room adjoining mine. He was exhausted, the emotional toll of the day's revelations finally catching up with him. I ordered room service and insisted he eat something before finally convincing him to try to sleep. We'll know more in the morning, I promised. Detective Callahan seems competent, and with Westridge's resources backing our private investigation, we'll find her. Alone in my room, I called Elizabeth to update her on the developments. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. I've been monitoring the situation, she informed me. Our security team lost track of the Audi near Rochester Airport. They're checking all departing flights. You think she's fleeing the country? It's what I would do in her position, Elizabeth replied pragmatically. The evidence against her is mounting, and she knows it. Her best option now is to get to whatever assets she's hidden offshore and disappear. We can't let that happen, I said firmly. Not after everything she's done. Agreed. I've taken the liberty of alerting our contacts at several international banks to watch for unusual activity in accounts connected to Blackwood Ventures or any of the shell companies we've identified. I smiled despite the situation. Elizabeth's network of influence never ceased to impress me. Thank you for all of this. Don't thank me yet, she replied. This is far from over. Get some rest, Madison. Tomorrow will be busy. Sleep proved elusive. As my mind raced through possible scenarios, where was Vanessa heading? What evidence had we missed? What would happen to the property, and to Dad, when this was all over? Around 3 a.m., my phone rang again. Callahan. We've got her, he said without preamble. State troopers pulled over the Audi for speeding near Buffalo. She was in the passenger seat with a man identified as Jason Mercer, a local real estate attorney, with connections to Blackwood Ventures. Relief flooded through me. You've arrested her? She's in custody, along with Mercer. We found a significant amount of cash in the vehicle and plane tickets to Grand Cayman departing tomorrow morning. She's not talking, but Mercer is already looking to cut a deal. What happens next? Formal charges will be filed in the morning. Breaking and entering, assault, document fraud to start. If we can prove her connection to your uncle's death, obviously that would change everything. I thanked him for the update and immediately went to Dad's room to share the news. Despite the hour, he was still awake, sitting in the dark watching the city lights through the window. They found her, I said gently. She's in custody. He nodded, accepting the information without visible reaction. What about the house and the property? With the fraudulent will exposed, ownership should revert according to Mom's original intentions, I explained. The house and land parcels would legally be mine since the transfer should have occurred when you remarried. Good, he said simply. That's what Claire would have wanted. I sat beside him, taking his hand. You know I would never force you to leave the house, right? It's your home too. A sad smile crossed his face. I don't think I can stay there now. Too many ghosts. Besides, it rightfully belongs to you. We don't need to figure everything out tonight, I assured him. One step at a time. For the first time in days, I felt the tension begin to ease. Vanessa was in custody, her schemes exposed. The legal process would take time, But the immediate danger had passed. Now we could focus on rebuilding both the legal documentation of my inheritance and, more importantly, my relationship with Dad. The next morning brought unexpected news. Callahan called to inform us that Jason Mercer had indeed decided to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for leniency. "He's given us everything," Callahan reported. Detailed records of how Vanessa planned and executed the will, substitution, documentation of the shell companies she used to obscure her connection to the land development, even communications regarding your Uncle James. "And?" I prompted, holding my breath. "It's circumstantial, but concerning. Mercer claims Vanessa mentioned having taken care of a legal problem around the time of James's death. She apparently drugged him with something that would mimic a heart attack. Mercer doesn't have direct evidence, but his testimony gives us enough to reopen the investigation into your uncle's death." I relayed this information to Dad, watching him struggle to process that the woman he had married might not only be a fraud and a thief, but potentially a murderer as well. "I keep thinking of moments that should have been red flags," he said, his voice distant. "Times when her behavior seemed odd or inconsistent. The way she discouraged my relationship with you. Her insistence on handling all the legal and financial paperwork herself." "She was good at what she did," I reminded him. "She counted on your trusting nature and manipulated you expertly." "Never again," he said with sudden fierceness. "I'm done being naive." Later that morning, we met with Harold Webb to discuss next steps in reclaiming my inheritance. The law offices were still in disarray from the break-in, but Webb had managed to reconstruct most of the essential documentation. With the fraudulent will exposed and Vanessa in custody, the court should have no difficulty recognizing your rightful ownership of the property, Webb assured me. "The process may take a few months, but the outcome is virtually certain." "And the house sale?" Dad asked. "Already canceled. The injunction took care of that immediately." As we discussed the details, I received a call from Elizabeth. "You should return to the house," she said without preamble. "Our team found something interesting behind a false wall in the basement. Something I think belongs to you." Dad and I exchanged confused glances before thanking Webb and heading back to Oakwood Drive. When we arrived, we found several Westridge security personnel in the basement, carefully removing sections of drywall to reveal a hidden storage area. We're scanning for structural anomalies as part of our property assessment," Elizabeth explained, joining us at the foot of the stairs. "This space didn't appear on any of the original house plans." As the final panel came away, I gasped. There, carefully wrapped in protective coverings, were dozens of boxes and containers, filled with the belongings I thought had been lost forever. "She didn't donate them," Dad realized, his voice thick with emotion. "She hid them." I approached the hidden cache, gently unwrapping the nearest box. Inside were my vinyl records, each still in its protective sleeve. Another container held my mother's cookbooks. A third contained the quilt my grandmother had made, still bearing the faint scent of the lavender sachets Mom had always kept in. The linen closet. Why would she hide these things instead of disposing of them? Elizabeth wondered aloud. Insurance, I realized. Leverage in case her plans went wrong. She knew how much these items meant to me, how devastated I'd be thinking they were gone forever. If she ever needed to negotiate, she could miraculously find some of these items as a peace offering. Dad knelt beside me, tears in his eyes, as he recognized item after item from our shared past. She truly thought of everything, he murmured. Almost everything, I corrected, standing to face Elizabeth and the Westridge team. She didn't count on who I've become. She thought she was dealing with the quiet, accommodating daughter who would grieve her losses and move on. She had no idea who I really was, or what I was capable of. Elizabeth smiled approvingly. A critical miscalculation on her part. As we began the process of carefully cataloging and recovering the hidden treasures, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. Yes, There would be legal battles ahead. Yes, the investigation into Uncle James's death would be painful. But, in this moment, surrounded by the physical embodiments of my family history that I thought had been lost forever, I allowed myself to feel something close to triumph. Vanessa had declared, "This is my house now," with such smug certainty. She truly had no idea who she was dealing with. A woman who had learned to recognize value others missed, who had developed the skills to protect what was rightfully hers, and who would never again allow anyone to erase her past or dictate her future. The next few weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of legal proceedings, property assessments, and emotional reckonings. Vanessa remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk and the mounting evidence against her. Jason Mercer, her accomplice, continued to cooperate with authorities, revealing an intricate web of fraud that extended well beyond my family's situation. "She's done this before," Detective Callahan informed us during a briefing at the station. Mercer's testimony suggests a pattern dating back at least 15 years. Different names, different cities, but the same basic scheme. Identify valuable properties with complex ownership situations, insinuate herself into the lives of those with control or access, then manipulate documentation to gain legal ownership. "How many victims are we talking about?" I asked, stomach churning at the thought of other families who had suffered similar losses. "We've identified 3 prior cases so far," Callahan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "The situation in Boston with her elderly fiancé who died before the wedding, a widow in Philadelphia whose children lost their inheritance, a business partner in Chicago whose signature mysteriously appeared on transfer documents he claims he never signed." Dad, sitting beside me, looked physically ill as he paged through the case summaries. "She's a predator," he murmured. "A calculating predator." "A good one," Callahan acknowledged grimly. "She learned from each situation, refined her methods. By the time she targeted your family, she had a sophisticated understanding of real estate law, document forgery, and probate procedures." I thought of the careful groundwork Vanessa had laid. The relationship with the notary who could authenticate fraudulent documents, the strategic elimination of my uncle who might have discovered the substituted will, the methodical erasure of my mother's presence from our home. Nothing had been impulsive or emotional. Every action had served her ultimate goal of acquiring valuable property. "What about Uncle James?" I asked. "Are you reopening the investigation into his death?" Callahan nodded. "The medical examiner is reviewing the case file and original autopsy results. Given Mercer's testimony about Vanessa's comments regarding taking care of a legal problem, there's sufficient cause to investigate further. We're also looking into the death of her former fiancé in Boston. The possibility that Vanessa had not only stolen from us but potentially murdered my uncle, my mother's brother, hit Dad particularly hard." He excused himself from the meeting, needing air and space to process these horrifying revelations. I found him outside the police station, standing motionless in the weak autumn sunlight. "I brought her into our lives," he said as I approached. "I gave her access to everything Claire and I built together." "Dad, stop," I said firmly. "Vanessa fooled everyone, lawyers, business partners, even the authorities in multiple cities. You weren't uniquely gullible." "I should have protected you better," he insisted. "Protected Claire's legacy." I took his hand, noting how much older. He suddenly looked. "We're reclaiming that legacy now, together." Back at the house on Oakwood Drive, the process of sorting through the recovered belongings continued. Each item emerging from Vanessa's hidden stash felt like reclaiming a piece of my history. Photographs I'd thought were lost forever, books annotated in my mother's handwriting, even my childhood teddy bear with its worn paw and crooked smile. "Can't believe she kept all this," Dad marveled, carefully unwrapping a set of crystal wine glasses that had been a wedding gift to him and Mom. "Why preserve these things if she was so determined to erase our past?" "Control," Elizabeth suggested. She had become a frequent presence during the recovery process, her expertise in property matters proving invaluable. Keeping these items gave her power over what you could and couldn't access. Plus, as Madison suggested, leverage if needed. The physical recovery of our belongings paralleled the legal recovery of my inheritance. Harold Webb, with assistance from Westridge's legal team, had successfully filed to invalidate the fraudulent will and reinstate my mother's original testament. The court moved with unusual speed given the criminal charges against Vanessa, recognizing the urgency of resolving the property ownership before further complications arose. The judge was particularly disturbed by the forged will, Webb reported after a preliminary hearing. Courtrooms see plenty of family disputes over inheritance, but outright document fraud of this sophistication is unusual. He's inclined to expedite our case. As suspected, the legal proceedings confirmed that ownership of both the house and the undeveloped land parcels should have been transferred to me upon Dad's remarriage to Vanessa 7 years earlier. The court appointed a forensic accounting team to trace all profits and transactions related to the property during that period, funds that would eventually be returned to me as the rightful owner. Throughout this process, I maintained my professional responsibilities at Westridge, balancing conference calls and strategic planning sessions with court appearances and evidence reviews. Elizabeth was understanding about my divided attention, even encouraging me to take more time for personal matters. The Pinewood development will still be there when this is resolved, she assured me during a late-night strategy call. Besides, your insider knowledge of the area has already given us a significant advantage in planning our approach. What she didn't say, but I understood implicitly, was that my personal stake in the property had created a perfect alignment of interests. Westridge wanted to develop the land parcels professionally and profitably. I wanted to ensure my mother's legacy was handled with respect and care. Our partnership would accomplish both goals. 6 weeks after Vanessa's arrest, the first formal charges were filed: fraud, document forgery, breaking and entering, assault, and conspiracy. The investigators were still building their case regarding Uncle James's death, awaiting toxicology results from the exhumed remains and tracking down witnesses from 5 years earlier. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, in early December. Dad and I arrived at the courthouse together, both apprehensive about seeing Vanessa face-to-face for the first time since her arrest. "You don't have to attend," I had told him the night before. "No one would blame you for keeping your distance." He had straightened his shoulders, a flash of his old determination returning. "I need to see this through, Maddie. For both of us. For Claire." The courtroom was nearly empty. Just the prosecutor, Vanessa's defense attorney, a court reporter, and a few officers. When they brought Vanessa in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. Her prison-issued jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame, and without her usual styling, her hair appeared thinner, grayer. Only her eyes remained unchanged, calculating and cold as they swept over us. Dad tensed beside me but remained silent as the charges were read and initial pleas entered. Vanessa pleaded not guilty to all counts, her voice steady and confident, despite her diminished appearance. Throughout the proceeding, she avoided looking directly at us, focusing instead on the judge and her attorney. Only at the end, as she was being led back to holding, did she finally meet my gaze. The hatred in her expression was palpable, even from across the room. I held her stare evenly, refusing to show any reaction. After everything she had done to destroy my family, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me affected by her presence. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, somehow alerted to the significance of the case. Dad shrank from their questions and cameras, but I stepped forward, shielding him from the worst of the onslaught. "Ms. Taylor, is it true your stepmother tried to steal your inheritance? Mr. Taylor, did you know your wife was a con artist? Is Westridge Corporation involved in the disputed property development?" I raised a hand for silence, drawing on my corporate experience to project calm authority. "My family is cooperating fully with law enforcement in this difficult situation. We're confident in the legal process and have no further comment at this time. Please respect our privacy as we work through these challenging circumstances. As we walked to the car, Dad squeezed my arm gratefully. "When did you become so poised under pressure?" he asked, with genuine admiration in his voice. "Practice," I replied with a small smile. Corporate acquisitions can get pretty intense. That evening, we had dinner together at his hotel. He had still not returned to the house, finding the memories too painful. Over pasta and wine, we talked more openly than we had in years, beginning to bridge the gap that had grown between us during Vanessa's influence. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Dad said, twirling spaghetti around his fork without actually eating. "After the trial, after everything is settled legally." "You don't have to decide anything right now," I assured him. "There's time." He shook his head. "I think I do need to decide. Staying in Rochester. It holds too many memories. Now? Good ones with you and Claire, but also 7 years of lies with Vanessa. I need a fresh start somewhere." "Arizona?" I asked tentatively, remembering their original relocation plans. "No," he said firmly. "That was her choice, not mine. I've actually been considering Charleston. I visited once for a conference years ago and loved it. The ocean, the history. It feels right." "Charleston would suit you," I agreed, trying to imagine him in the genteel southern city. "What about work?" "I've been with the same company for 30 years, Maddie. I could retire now if I wanted to." A flash of something, determination perhaps, crossed his face. "But I think I'd like to try something new. Maybe consulting or teaching at a community college. I have experience that could be valuable." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I think that sounds perfect." "What about you?" he asked. "Will you stay at Westridge? Continue climbing the corporate ladder?" The question gave me pause. I had been so focused on resolving the immediate crisis that I hadn't given much thought to my own long-term plans. "I don't know," I admitted. "I love my work at Westridge, and Elizabeth has been incredibly supportive. But this situation has made me realize how quickly priorities can change." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother always said you had her business sense, but my creativity. Maybe there's a way to combine both." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but his comment lingered in my mind. Creativity wasn't something I'd had much opportunity to express in my corporate role, focused as it was on analysis and strategy. Yet I had always enjoyed the creative aspects of problem-solving, finding innovative approaches where others saw only obstacles. The next morning, I met with Elizabeth at Westridge's local office to discuss the development plans for the property. Parcels. The preliminary designs showed a high-end residential community similar to others the company had built, elegant, exclusive, and undeniably profitable. "The location is perfect," Elizabeth enthused, spreading the renderings across the conference table. "Close enough to downtown for convenience, but with that secluded, wooded feel that luxury buyers want. We're projecting complete sellout within 18 months of completion." I studied the plans with mixed emotions. The development was beautifully designed and would certainly maximize the property's financial value. Yet something felt missing. Connection to the land's history, to the Preston family legacy that had nearly been erased. "What if we took a different approach?" I suggested hesitantly. "Something that honors the property's past while creating something valuable for the community?" Elizabeth raised an eyebrow but gestured for me to continue. "My mother's family owned this land for generations before most of it was sold off and developed into Pinewood Estates," I explained. "What remains is the last piece of that legacy. I'd like to see something that reflects that history, perhaps incorporating the original farmhouse architectural elements, preserving more of the old-growth trees, maybe even including some public green space." "Public space reduces the buildable area," Elizabeth pointed out. "Even the pragmatist. That impacts our profit margin, but enhances the overall appeal and potentially the price point for the remaining units," I countered. Plus, there are tax incentives for conservation easements and historical preservation elements. A slow smile spread across Elizabeth's face. You're proposing a more sustainable, community-oriented approach that still generates significant returns. Interesting. I'm proposing a development that I would be proud to have bearing my family's name, I clarified. The Preston Gardens, perhaps. Something that feels like a natural evolution of the land's story, not an erasure of its past. Elizabeth studied me for a long moment. You know, when I first brought you onto my team, I saw your analytical skills and drive. But this vision combined with practical business sense, this is why you've become invaluable to Westridge. She gathered up the current plans and set them aside. Let's start fresh. Tell me more about what you envision. For the next 2 hours, we sketched ideas and discussed possibilities, creating the framework for a development that would honor my mother's family while still fulfilling Westridge's investment objectives. By the time we finished, a new concept had emerged. A thoughtfully designed community with preserved green spaces, architectural elements that echoed the area's historical buildings, and even a small central park named after my mother. This could work, Elizabeth concluded, reviewing our notes. Different from our usual approach, but potentially even more profitable in the long run, due to the unique character and story behind it. It feels right, I said simply. As I drove back to the hotel afterward, I found myself taking a detour past the house on Oakwood Drive. The police had finally released it from their investigation, and the Westridge security team had installed new locks and an alarm system to protect the recovered belongings still being cataloged inside. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, studying the familiar lines of the colonial-style home where I had grown up. Despite everything that had happened within its walls, both the loving family memories and Vanessa's calculated deceptions, the structure itself remained unchanged, solid, and enduring. On impulse, I got out of the car and unlocked the front door. The interior was in transition, some rooms still bearing Vanessa's modern, impersonal decor, others partially restored with the recovered family pieces. It felt like a physical manifestation of the journey we had been through, the violation and loss, the recovery and reclamation, and now the opportunity to create something new from the pieces of the past. I walked through each room slowly, memories surfacing with each familiar sight. Mom taught me to bake cookies in the kitchen. Dad helped me with science projects at the dining room table. Family movie nights in the living room, the three of us crowded together on the old sectional sofa that Vanessa had so quickly replaced. Upstairs, I paused at the door to my old bedroom, the space that had been emptied and designated as Vanessa's home office. The walls had been repainted back to their original soft blue, and some of my recovered belongings had been placed on the shelves. It looked like a frozen moment in time, precariously balanced between my childhood and an uncertain future. Moving to the master bedroom, my parents' room that had become Dad and Vanessa's, I noticed that all traces of her presence had been systematically removed. Dad's simple, practical items remained, but the expensive bedding, decorative pillows, and vanity table with its array of cosmetics were gone. The room felt unfinished, waiting for direction. In that moment, standing in the house that legally belonged to me but that held both my father's memories and mine, an idea began to take shape. Dad wanted a fresh start away from Rochester. I had a demanding career that kept me traveling frequently. Neither of us needed to live in this house full-time, yet neither of us wanted to simply sell it and erase our connection to this place. What if the house could serve a new purpose? One that honored Mom's memory while creating something positive from the painful experience we had endured? The seed of an idea grew as I wandered back downstairs and out to the garden where Mom's rose bushes had once flourished. Vanessa had replaced them with low-maintenance shrubs, but I could still picture the vibrant blooms that had brought my mother such joy. In my mind's eye, I could see the garden restored, expanded perhaps, becoming a place of beauty and healing. I pulled out my phone and called Dad. I'm at the house, I told him when he answered. And I have an idea I want to run by you. It's about the future, both yours and mine, and what happens to this place. I'm listening, he said, curiosity evident in his voice. What if we turned the house into a foundation headquarters? The Claire Preston Taylor Foundation for Financial Literacy and Fraud Prevention. We could use my inheritance to fund it. Create educational programs to help others recognize and avoid situations like what happened to us. There was a pause on the line, and for a moment I worried the suggestion might have upset him. Then I heard a sound I hadn't heard in far too long, Dad's genuine laugh, warm and approving. Your mother would have loved that, he said, using our worst experience to help others avoid the same fate. It's perfect, Maddie. You think so? Relief flooded through me. I could oversee it from my position at Westridge and hire staff to run the day-to-day operations. You could be involved as much or as little as you want. I think I'd want to be very involved, he replied, surprising me. In fact, it might be exactly the purpose I've been looking for, teaching others from my experience, preventing other families from being torn apart by predators like Vanessa. As we discussed logistics and possibilities, I felt a growing sense of rightness. The house that Vanessa had tried to claim, the home she had declared was hers now, would instead become a force, working directly against everything she represented. The inheritance she had schemed to steal would fund efforts to protect others from similar predators. She had no idea who I really was. Not just a successful businesswoman capable of uncovering her fraud, but also someone determined to create meaning and purpose from even the most painful experiences. In her blind greed, she had underestimated not just my resources and abilities, but the strength of the family bonds she had tried to sever. 2 days later, as I sat in another courtroom watching Vanessa's arraignment on additional charges related to Uncle James's death, I felt oddly at peace. The damage she had caused was real and lasting, but so was our response to it. Dad sat beside me, reviewing preliminary plans for the foundation on his tablet during breaks in the proceedings. Across the courtroom, Vanessa's eyes occasionally darted toward us, no doubt wondering about our calm demeanor and quiet conversations. She would never understand what we were building from the ruins of her deception. Something stronger, more meaningful, and infinitely more valuable than the property she had coveted. As the judge denied bail yet again and Vanessa was led away, in handcuffs, Dad and I exchanged a glance of shared purpose. The road ahead would not be easy, but we would walk it together, reclaiming not just our possessions and property, but our future as well. 1 year later, I stood in the garden behind the house on Oakwood Drive, watching as workers installed a bronze plaque near the newly restored rose beds. The spring air carried the scent of fresh mulch and blooming flowers, a fitting backdrop for this milestone moment. The Claire Preston Taylor Center for Financial Protection and Education, Dad read aloud, coming to stand beside me. Official opening next month. Your mother would be so proud. I squeezed his hand. Of both of us. The transformation of our family home had been a labor of love throughout the past year. The ground floor now housed offices, a resource library, and a small conference room where educational workshops would be held. The upper floor had been converted into a comfortable apartment where Dad stayed during his frequent visits to Rochester, though his permanent residence was now a charming bungalow in Charleston's historic district. The first session is already full, I told him. 25 seniors signed up for the Recognizing Financial Predators workshop. Dad nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. And the college program? Starting this fall at Monroe Community. College. 200 students enrolled in the financial literacy course so far. We had structured the foundation to address fraud prevention and financial education on multiple fronts: programs for vulnerable seniors, curriculum for college students, resources for families managing inheritances, and specialized training for legal and financial professionals. The work felt meaningful in a way that even my most successful corporate acquisitions never had. My role at Westridge had evolved as well. After the Preston Gardens development broke ground, a thoughtfully designed community that preserved the natural landscape while creating beautiful, sustainable homes, Elizabeth had approached me with an unexpected proposal. "We're creating a new division," she had explained during a dinner at the Pinnacle, "focusing on community-integrated development projects, developments that enhance rather than simply exploit their locations. I want you to head it." The opportunity had aligned perfectly with my evolving priorities. I still handled selected corporate acquisitions, but much of my energy now went to identifying development opportunities that could serve both business and community interests. The financial returns proved Elizabeth's instincts correct. Buyers were willing to pay premium prices for homes in thoughtfully designed communities, with authentic connections to local history and culture. "Madison? Earth to Madison." Dad waved his hand in front of my face, breaking my reverie. "Sorry," I smiled. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a year." "Speaking of change," he said, glancing at his watch, "we should head to the courthouse. Detective Callahan called earlier. They're expecting the verdict today." Vanessa's trial had been lengthy and complex, with multiple charges across several jurisdictions. The financial crimes had been prosecuted first, resulting in convictions for fraud, forgery, and theft. The more serious charges related to Uncle James's death had taken longer to build, requiring extensive forensic evidence and expert testimony. Through it all, Vanessa had maintained her innocence, firing multiple defense attorneys and eventually representing herself, a decision the judge had strongly advised against. Her courtroom demeanor had grown increasingly erratic as the evidence mounted, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her exposed crimes. We arrived at the courthouse to find a small crowd gathered outside, mostly journalists, covering the high-profile case, but also a few unfamiliar faces that Callahan later identified as victims from Vanessa's earlier schemes. "They've been following the trial closely," he explained as he escorted us to our seats. "For some of them, this is the first real chance at justice after years of believing they were alone in being deceived." The courtroom fell silent as the jury filed in. Vanessa sat at the defense table, somehow managing to look both defiant and diminished in her prison attire. She didn't turn as we entered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid set of her spine. The verdict, when it came, felt almost anticlimactic after the months of testimony and evidence. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder in Uncle James's death. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, but with the multiple convictions across jurisdictions, there was little doubt that Vanessa would spend the remainder of her life in prison. As the officers led her away, she finally turned, her gaze locking with mine for a brief moment. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold hatred and perhaps a flicker of grudging respect. Recognition, at last, that she had severely misjudged her opponent. Outside the courthouse, we gave brief statements to the press, focusing not on Vanessa, but on the Foundation's work to prevent similar crimes. Several of the other victims approached afterward, sharing their stories and expressing interest in contributing to the educational programs. "You've created something important here," one elderly woman told me, clasping my hand. "My late husband was taken in by a scheme similar to what your family experienced. If we'd had access to resources like your foundation offers, things might have turned out differently." That evening, we hosted a small gathering at the house, not a celebration of Vanessa's conviction, but rather a commemoration of how far we'd come in reclaiming and repurposing our family legacy. Harold Webb attended, along with Detective Callahan, Elizabeth, and several key staff members from the Foundation. As twilight settled over the garden, I found myself standing beside the rose bushes that had been replanted in my mother's memory. Elizabeth joined me, offering a glass of champagne. "2 successful ventures?" she proposed, clinking her glass against mine, And unexpected journeys, I added. She studied me with her characteristically shrewd gaze. You know, when I first recruited you to Westridge, I saw a brilliant analyst with extraordinary potential. What I didn't anticipate was how personal circumstances would shape that potential into something even more valuable. Pain can be a powerful teacher, I acknowledged. Though I wouldn't recommend my particular curriculum. Elizabeth laughed softly. No, I suppose not, but the outcome is impressive nonetheless. She gestured toward the gathering, Dad engaged, in animated conversation with Webb about the Foundation's latest initiatives, Callahan discussing security measures with our program director, the entire scene backlit by the warm glow from the house that had almost been lost to us. You've turned a private tragedy into a public resource, she continued. That's rare, Madison. Most people either collapse under that kind of betrayal or become consumed by bitterness. I considered her words, recognizing their truth. The path, from that moment of standing in my emptied bedroom to this peaceful evening in the restored garden, had been neither straight nor easy. There had been days of rage, nights of questioning every decision, moments when the weight of what Vanessa had done threatened to overwhelm me. I had help, I said finally, nodding toward Dad. And purpose. Those make all the difference. Later, after the guests had departed and Dad had retired to his apartment upstairs, I walked through the quiet house, now the Claire Preston Taylor Center, reflecting on its evolution. The living room where we had once watched movies as a family was now a comfortable meeting space with informational resources lining the walls. The dining room had become a conference area where victims of financial fraud could connect with legal, advisors, and support services. Yet despite these physical transformations, the essence of the house remained. The solid construction my father had maintained so carefully, the quality materials my mother had selected with her designer's eye, the history embedded in its very foundations. Vanessa had tried to erase that essence with her modern furniture and minimalist aesthetic, but she had never succeeded in changing the home's true character. In many ways, I realized, the house paralleled my own journey. Vanessa had attempted to minimize my presence in my father's life, to reduce me to an occasional visitor with no meaningful connection to my own history. She had underestimated the foundations my parents had built, both in the physical home and in the person I had become. My phone chimed with a text message from Lydia Chen, the Foundation's executive director. Final registration numbers for next month's opening events. We're at capacity for all sessions with waiting lists. This is really happening. I smiled, typing back a quick acknowledgement. The Foundation's work felt like the perfect synthesis of my business acumen and my personal experience, a way to transform something painful into something purposeful. We couldn't prevent every financial predator from targeting vulnerable individuals, but we could equip potential victims with knowledge and resources that might help them recognize warning signs I had missed in Vanessa. The next morning, I met with the Preston Gardens development team at the construction site. What had once been undeveloped land at the edge of Pinewood Estates was now taking shape as an innovative residential community, one that preserved nearly 40% of the natural landscape while creating homes that complemented rather than dominated their environment. The first phase is selling even faster than projected, the project manager reported as we toured the model home. Buyers are particularly drawn to the historical connection and the community-oriented design. And the Claire Preston Memorial Park? I asked, referring to the central green space that would feature gardens similar to those my mother had loved. Why? Schedule for completion next month, in time for the first residents to move in. As I walked the property, I felt a deep satisfaction that transcended profit margins and investment returns. This development honored the land's history and my mother's legacy while creating something valuable for future generations. It was as much a part of my healing process as the foundation, allowing me to reclaim control over property that had nearly been stolen through Vanessa's machinations. Back at my downtown apartment that evening, I sorted through the last box of recovered items from the hidden storage area Vanessa had created. Most of the personal belongings had already been distributed, some to the house-turned center, others to Dad's Charleston home, the most precious mementos kept in my own space. This final box contained primarily documents, old school records, greeting cards, letters. At the bottom, I discovered a journal I had kept during my first year of college. Its pages filled with reflections on leaving home, academic challenges, and evolving dreams. One entry caught my eye, dated shortly after Dad had announced his engagement. To Vanessa, Dad seems happy, which is what matters most. Still, something about V feels calculated. The way she studies the house when she thinks no one is watching, how quickly she's rearranging things. Mom would say I'm being overprotective, but I can't shake the feeling that V sees Dad as a means to an end rather than a partner. Maybe I'm just resistant to change. Need to focus on being supportive for Dad's sake. Even then, I had sensed something amiss. My instincts had registered the warning signs my conscious mind had dismissed out. Of deference to Dad's happiness. Now, with years of corporate negotiation experience behind me, I recognized that those early uneasiness had been my intuition detecting the inconsistencies in Vanessa's presentation, the subtle tells that indicated her true motives. The journal provided a tangible reminder of how far I had come, from the uncertain college student willing to suppress her own concerns to the confident professional who had systematically exposed and defeated Vanessa's schemes. The core of who I was had remained consistent, but life had honed those natural instincts into formidable skills. My phone rang. Elizabeth checking in about an upcoming board meeting where we would present the Community Integrated Development Division's first-year results. The quarterly reports look exceptional, she noted. The Preston Gardens model is already influencing our approach to 3 other projects. That's the goal, I replied. Creating a template that can be adapted to different locations while maintaining the core principles. After discussing a few logistical details, Elizabeth paused. Have you given any thought to the Boston proposal? The historical waterfront property? The project she referenced would be our division's largest undertaking yet, revitalizing a neglected waterfront area with historical significance while creating both residential and public spaces. It would require relocating to Boston for at least a year to properly oversee the critical phases. I'm still considering it, I answered truthfully. It's an incredible opportunity, but the timing with the Foundation's launch is challenging. The Foundation has an excellent director in Lydia, Elizabeth pointed out. And your father seems increasingly involved in its operations. Perhaps it's time to trust that what you've built can thrive even without your daily presence. Her observation was perceptive, touching on my lingering reluctance to step back from direct oversight of the Foundation and the house. After coming so close to losing both to Vanessa's schemes, I had perhaps become overly protective of these reclaimed aspects of my family legacy. You might be right, I acknowledged. Let me think about it. Later that night, I called Dad to discuss the Boston possibility. To my surprise, he was immediately supportive. Maddie, the Foundation is established now. The systems are in place, the team is strong, and I'm here regularly enough to provide continuity. You shouldn't hold yourself back professionally because you feel responsible for maintaining what we've built. But Mom's house is serving its perfect purpose, he finished firmly. Claire would be the first to tell you to pursue this opportunity. Remember how she always encouraged you to spread your wings? The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on our parallel journeys over the past year. Dad had found a new purpose both through the Foundation and through teaching, part-time at a Charleston community college. He had even begun dating recently, cautiously, sensibly, and with a healthy awareness of red flags that might have escaped his notice before Vanessa. Life continues, he said philosophically. We honor the past without becoming prisoners to it. His words stayed with me as I fell asleep, and the next morning I called Elizabeth to accept the Boston assignment. The decision felt right. a natural evolution rather than an abandonment of what we had accomplished in Rochester. 2 weeks later, the Claire Preston Taylor Center hosted its official opening ceremony. The event drew extensive media coverage, focusing on the innovative approach to financial fraud prevention and education. As I delivered my remarks to the assembled guests, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this moment. This center was born from personal experience with deception and loss, I told the audience. But its purpose extends far beyond our family's story. Financial exploitation affects millions of Americans each year, often targeting the most vulnerable among us: seniors, grieving individuals, those undergoing major life transitions. I gestured to the resources and spaces around us. Everything you see here is designed to shed light on tactics used by those who prey on others for financial gain. Through education, community support, and professional training, we aim to create a network of protection that makes such exploitation increasingly difficult. After the formal program concluded, I found a quiet moment alone in my mother's restored garden. The roses were beginning to bloom, their fragrance filling the air with memories of childhood afternoons spent helping Mom tend these same flowers. I could almost hear her voice, practical, loving, wise, telling me that beauty and strength often grow from the same roots. "Madison?" I turned to find Dad approaching, a small wrapped package in his hand. "I wanted to give you this before you head to Boston next week," he said, offering the gift. "Something to take with you." Inside the box was a silver compass, elegant and clearly antique. I recognized it immediately from the photos in our recovered albums. It had belonged to my grandfather Preston, a memento from his Navy days. "Mom kept this in her jewelry box," I said softly. "I thought it was lost." Dad shook his head. "It was in a small hidden compartment in her vanity, one place Vanessa never discovered. I found it while we were renovating the master bedroom for my apartment." I ran my finger over the engraved initials and date, feeling a connection to family history that Vanessa had tried so hard to sever. "Your mother always said this compass represented the Preston family trait, finding the right direction even in stormy conditions." Dad smiled. "She would have recognized that quality in you these past months." As the sun began to set over the garden, casting long shadows across the newly installed pathways and benches, I felt a profound sense of completion. The house that Vanessa had so arrogantly claimed as hers now had found its true purpose. The belongings she had hidden away had been reclaimed and repurposed. The family bonds she had tried to weaken had instead grown stronger through adversity. She had never understood who I really was, not just Madison Taylor, daughter of Richard and Claire, but a woman of substance and determination who would fight relentlessly to protect what mattered. Her fundamental miscalculation wasn't about my professional resources or connections, but about the core character my parents had nurtured, the values that defined my decisions even in the darkest moments. As Dad and I walked back toward the house, now illuminated for the evening reception, I carried the compass in my palm, its weight reassuring. Whatever challenges lay ahead in Boston or beyond, I would face them with the same clarity of purpose that had guided me through this crucible. Vanessa was now serving consecutive sentences that ensured she would never again walk free, her schemes exposed and her carefully constructed facade shattered. Yet in an ironic twist, her actions had ultimately strengthened rather than destroyed the legacy she had coveted. The Preston Taylor heritage now extended beyond physical property to include a foundation helping others, a thoughtfully developed community honoring the land's history, and a father-daughter relationship tempered and refined by shared adversity. Looking back at the house, my mother's house, my childhood home, now transformed into a center for protection and education, I smiled at the thought of Vanessa's declaration that day in my emptied bedroom. "This is my house now," she had proclaimed with such smug certainty. She couldn't have been more wrong. 3 years later, I stood on the balcony of my Boston apartment overlooking the harbor, watching as morning light played across the water. The Waterfront Heritage Project, as we had named the development, was nearing completion, its thoughtful blend of historical preservation and modern amenities already garnering architectural awards and community praise. My phone chimed with a video call from Lydia at the foundation. "Perfect timing," she greeted me. "Your father just arrived for the anniversary celebration. Want to say hello?" The screen shifted to show Dad standing in the center's main hall, where volunteers were arranging chairs for the upcoming event. At 62, he looked younger than he had during those final years with Vanessa. The strain of living with her deception had aged him in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until it was gone. "There's my girl," he said warmly. "How's Boston treating you?" "Brilliantly," I replied. "The project is exceeding expectations. How's the turnout looking for tomorrow?" "We're at double our projections," Lydia chimed in, turning the camera to show the expanded space. "Thanks to the feature in Financial Protection Monthly, we've got professionals coming from 6 states." The foundation had grown beyond our initial vision, now offering certification programs for financial advisors, specializing in elder protection and hosting quarterly symposiums that brought together experts from legal, financial, and psychological fields. What had begun as our family's response to personal trauma had evolved into a nationally recognized resource with affiliate centers opening in Chicago and Denver. After finishing the call, I turned back to the harbor view, reflecting on the unexpected paths life had taken. The Boston project had been scheduled as a 1-year assignment, but its success had led to Elizabeth appointing me as permanent director of the Northeast Division, with responsibility for similar initiatives throughout the region. My apartment contained carefully selected items from the recovered belongings. Mom's favorite reading chair, the compass Dad had given me, family photos that now decorated my walls. These pieces of home grounded me in my history while allowing me to build something new. The doorbell rang. My weekend guest arrived as planned. I opened the door to find Michael Sullivan, the historical preservation consultant who had become an increasingly important part of my life over the past year. "Ready for our tour of the North End properties?" he asked, greeting me with a warm embrace. Our professional collaboration had gradually evolved into a personal connection built on shared values and complementary perspectives. Michael understood my complex relationship with property and development, how I viewed each project through both business and personal lenses, seeking balance between preservation and progress. "Just need to grab my notes," I replied, collecting the portfolio containing assessments of several historic buildings we were evaluating for a potential community-focused restoration. As we walked through Boston's historic neighborhoods later, that morning, discussing architectural details and community needs, I found myself appreciating how my perspective had evolved since that first devastating moment of standing in my emptied bedroom. The loss I had experienced had ultimately expanded rather than diminished my life, opening pathways to meaningful work, renewed family bonds, and unexpected relationships. That evening, after a productive day of site evaluations, Michael and I dined at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. Our conversation drifted from professional topics to more personal reflections. "Will you be staying in Boston permanently?" he asked, the question carrying weight beyond professional curiosity. I considered it carefully before answering. "The work here is fulfilling, and I've grown attached to the city, but Rochester will always be a touchstone. The foundation, the Preston Gardens community, the connections I've maintained there." "Perhaps it doesn't need to be either-or," he suggested. "In an age of remote work and efficient travel, maybe home can exist in multiple places." His observation echoed something I had been contemplating lately, how identity and belonging weren't necessarily confined to single locations or roles. The woman who had fought so fiercely for her childhood home had learned that legacy could be mobile, carried forward in values and actions, rather than solely in physical spaces. The following week, I flew back to Rochester for the Foundation's anniversary event. The celebration brought together staff, volunteers, program participants, and supporters for a day of workshops, recognitions, and planning for future initiatives. Standing at the podium to deliver opening remarks, I surveyed the gathered community, faces, representing different ages, backgrounds, and experiences, all united by commitment to financial protection and education. Many were survivors of exploitation themselves, transforming personal pain into advocacy for others. 3 years ago, this center began with a simple premise, I told the audience. That knowledge is the most effective defense against exploitation. That communities can create safety nets for vulnerable members. That even painful experiences can become foundations for positive change. As applause filled the room that had once been our family living room, I caught Dad's eye from his seat, in the front row. His proud smile reflected all we had accomplished, not just the reclaiming of property and justice for Vanessa's crimes, but the creation of something meaningful from the aftermath. Vanessa had seen only the material value of our house and land, blinded by greed to their deeper worth as anchors for memory and meaning. Her limited vision had ultimately been her downfall, while our broader perspective had transformed loss into legacy. In the garden afterward, sharing coffee with program participants amid the blooming roses that would always remind me of Mom, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the painful journey itself, but for the strength it had revealed, the bonds it had reinforced, and the purpose it had clarified. The house that Vanessa had tried to claim stood as a testament to resilience and reinvention, just like the woman I had become. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.